Good morning everybody and welcome to this Business Travel Direct and SAP Concur webinar. Just before we start, I will let you know that we'll be recording this session, so if you could please keep your phone on mute, and if you have any questions please do use the panel to submit them, and we'll come to those at the end of this demonstration. So today we're going to be looking at some of the challenges faced by organisations around their travel and expense process. We're going to look at how you as a client or a potential client could benefit from the expertise in travel Business Travel Direct bring when combined with SAP Concur. And this relates to travel, expense and invoice. We'll also look at a case study of one of our clients and also present a full demo of the expense process. And as I say, at the end there'll be time for any questions that you may have. So what I'd like to do first of all is introduce the team. So I'm Vanessa Bailey and I'm Director of Client Partnerships here at Business Travel Direct. And I'm joined by two colleagues from SAP Concur, Jessica Davis and Paul Aubrey. So I'm going to hand over now to Paul, who's going to talk about some of the challenges that organisations may face.
Good morning, everybody. So first of all, we start off by really looking at what the problem is. So we identify that how much does the trip cost, and do you have visibility of that, the cost of that trip? The second area we'll look at is that what do travellers dread about every trip? Is it availability of content for where they're travelling? Are they booking the cheapest and lowest logical fares? And then this streams into how do the finance team keep on top of this too? So does the finance team have visibility of what is being spent? And with SAP Concur Travel and Expense, you have a solution here that can identify and monitor all that spend, which eventually will assist with costs and impact the bottom line completely. So what we want to aim to do today is to give everybody a better understanding of the cost of a business trip. Have happy travellers, because happy travellers hopefully make better business. Free up time with your finance team by having visibility in one central place to manage spend, and help your business grow from the bottom line.
Lovely. So just before we get into the demo, I just wanted to run through a bit of a case study with you, which is one of our clients, Dermalogica. I'm sure you may know Dermalogica are a leading manufacturer in skincare, part of the Unilever group with 5 locations around the world, including the UK. Now, Dermalogica traditionally had a very manual setup for their travel and expense processes. They had an in-house team of people booking travel, and they had complete paper approval and expense forms, which, as you can imagine, was very time-consuming for the travellers. And duty of care was also an issue because they didn't have any out-of-hours assistance. So what was the solution? Dermalogica chose to work with Business Travel Direct and SAP Concur as the solution to all of these issues through a combined travel and expense platform, as well as Concur Invoice. Now, the result of these changes, there have been significant cost savings, both from a reduction in travel costs and also, importantly, savings through the processes of invoicing. So that has been some significant savings there. But it's not only about cost, it's also about traveller satisfaction, because that's really important. They've got more control of their trips, it's easier to book them, and expense process and expense claim is much easier for them. So I just wanted to share that with you as it gives you a good indication of how this solution can bring benefits across the company. So I'm going to hand over now to Jess, who's going to talk us through a demo.
Good morning, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here in front of you this morning. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I've been with SAP Concur coming up to 5 years now, and what I really love about the partnership that we have with Business Travel Direct is the ability to help businesses not only save money, but also to scale and grow and meet their key objectives, how and when they'd like. So what we believe at SAP Concur is that all payables, regardless of how they're incurred, should be under one roof. So we can help you and your organisation see spend clearly and manage it proactively, using the tools that you so choose to partner with us for. So in this demonstration today, we're going to be talking about travel and expense and how those two areas go hand in hand, both making the traveller's life a lot easier, but also the finance team, enabling them to use rich data insights in order to unlock potential savings across the business. One other area where we do also help companies automate the piece of the payables process is, of course, supplier invoicing. In my mind, it doesn't really matter if your employees are handed a receipt or your supplier gives you an invoice. Ultimately, that spend needs to be accounted for and somebody somewhere needs to get paid. So encompassing this all under one roof is going to help you get the information that you need in order to make strategic decisions in real time. So think of us as basically everything payables except for payroll. That's the one thing that we don't do. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to some of our friends. We're going to be working through a typical workflow. This doesn't mean to say that this is reflective of the workflow within your business. We can accommodate lots of different workflows, but just to keep things nice and simple and high level this morning, we're going to imagine that we are a chap called Thomas who is taking a business trip from London Heathrow into Paris in order to hopefully close a contract that he's been working on for some time. So we're going to follow his journey and how his expense report writes itself and ultimately ends up with Annie, his boss, his budget holder, and his approving line manager. Annie is going to review the claim that's been submitted, and ultimately, once she's happy, it's going to end up with Freddie, who's in finance. And we're going to take a little bit more of an in-depth look at some of the cool things that Freddie's able to take a look at as far as the data's been captured, and ultimately help her drive the business in the right direction. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to Thomas. Thomas has just gotten off the phone to Matthew Abbott, who is a key stakeholder in the deal that he's running at the moment. And Matthew has invited Thomas to come out to the Parisian office and deliver a final pitch to the final and ultimate decision makers. So as you would with any meeting, you'd send out a diary invite with the correct date and time, location, etc. The thing that he does differently, because he's a Concur user, is he actually includes Concur on the invitation. So remember that. We'll talk a little bit more about the reasons why he does that slightly later on, so all will be revealed shortly. So it's time for him to book his flights, and Ness is very kindly going to take us through what that process looks like for him.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this occasion, Thomas used SAP Concur Travel, which he could do via his desktop or he could do on his mobile, and he's putting in his criteria. Now, obviously, for a trip to Paris, he would absolutely use the online booking tool, but if it was perhaps a really complicated multi-sector flight or it was a long-haul flight, he may want to contact Business Travel Direct, our travel team, by telephone or email to make that booking. It wouldn't matter how he makes the booking, the end process and the whole process that we're going to talk you through will end up the same. So he's put this in, put his criteria in, and it's giving details of his flight, and it shows that he's got a choice of airlines that he could choose to go from Heathrow to Paris with. He's looking at BA, and he's got a choice of fares, whether he needs a hand baggage only fare or whether he needs a fare that includes a whole baggage, and he's making that selection of the choice of a British Airways flight. So he goes through, he makes that booking, and essentially it's booked. That's all done, so it's giving him confirmation of what's booked. He's got his outward flight from Heathrow to Paris on the 5th of November, and he's returning back the following day back into Heathrow. So now Jess will take you back through what he's going to do when he actually starts to travel on that trip.
Yeah, so the beauty of booking within Concur Travel is this booking is automatically going to pull across as a line item in his expense report. So let's pretend the day's come and he's ready to travel from his home in High Wycombe to London Heathrow. So he sets off nice and early, his flight's on time, and he's feeling really good. So he jumps in his car, opens up his Concur mobile application, and he's going to start tracking his journey from A to B. So as you'll probably see here, in the second slide, he would have clicked on the mileage button, hit start, and ultimately that's it. He can get on with actually travelling to Heathrow. And it's going to record the exact number of miles and the exact journey that he undertakes. Once he arrives at his destination, he can hit stop, and just like with his flight, it's going to pull across automatically into his expense report for him. So no effort, super easy. Now, this next slide is incredibly fast. And I guess it just goes to show how quick and easy it is to take photographs of receipts while you're on the go. So this is a 48-second clip that I'm going to show you. And what Thomas is actually doing is he's parked his car at the airport, he's paid for his parking, and he's also bought himself a coffee ahead of catching his flight. So whilst he sat down at the terminal lounge, he has literally got a couple of minutes to pull out his smartphone, and he's going to take photographs of those 2 receipts. So here's the first one. Quite easily take a photo, and using OCR, which is optical character recognition software, the technology is going to lift that information and populate an expense line item in his expense claim. So the first one, you see it's just popped up at the top, it's ready to be viewed, and this is the second one for the parking, which is also going through the technology. It's incredibly difficult to talk to these slides because it is working so quickly. In 48 seconds, Thomas has managed to write his expense report for his parking and for his coffee. So just taking you back actually very slightly on this video, because I appreciate it did move incredibly quickly. Just to show you here this little snapshot. So far you'll see today that we've got the parking for £7.50, and we've also got his coffee. Because of the time of the day, it's coded assuming that this was lunch. You're probably wondering where all of these expense types come from. We'll go on to talk a little bit more in detail when we come on to the finance stage around how we're able to track expenses according to your unique general ledger codes, depending on the finance system that you're using today. So these might not be reflective of what you have within your business, but the software is configurable and tailorable to make sure that we're capturing the correct accounting string in the background, depending on where your employee is based, the cost centres, the departments, and the all-important nominal ledger information. So hopefully that wasn't too quick, but ultimately it's magic software where you can take a photograph of the receipts and your expense report's going to write itself. So the plane's on time, he catches his flight and he's headed into Paris. When he lands on the other side, Thomas hails an Uber, and because he's actually connected his Uber application with SAP Concur, there's no need to get any receipts or anything to detail the information about that particular journey. it's automatically, because of the integration, going to pull itself across into a line item for him again. So hopefully now you're beginning to build a picture of just how simple it is to create an expense report whilst you're on the go. There's little to no information being required from Thomas in order to populate the key information onto that line item. And ultimately, it gives him more time to focus on the reason for his trip, which is to go in and win that contract. So he turns up at his meeting. Again, he's got plenty of time. He's not flustered because his trip to now has been super easy. So that allows him to really pull and focus on the actual meeting itself. And I'm pleased to say he did an amazing job. So to celebrate, he decides to take his customers out after the decision's been made and enjoy a nice lunch ahead of heading back to his hotel for the evening, ready to catch a flight the next morning. So in the same way, when it comes to collecting the bill, he pays for that and takes a photograph of his receipt, just like he did with his parking and with his coffee at Heathrow. And here we're beginning to build out that picture. So you'll notice up here we've got the coffee that he bought this morning, the parking, his lunch with his client, the Uber journey, and also, of course, his airfare. Notice on the right-hand side, there's a few things that I'd like to point out. So it is possible to automatically integrate corporate card programs with the technology. So as and when a purchase gets made using a corporate card, it's going to automatically feed through into his expense report and match itself off with the corresponding receipt image. SAP Concur can also deal with all foreign currencies, and the FX rate will depend on the source of the information. So in the instance of the taxi, we're pulling the foreign exchange rate from the bank. In the instance of the entertainment, we're actually taking an Oanda feed in order to make that conversion. Pretty clear up at the top, the amount, and ultimately, we'll just go into actually one of the line items. So with the entertainment, remember at the beginning of this presentation, and Thomas sent out that invitation to his customer, and he included SAP Concur on that invitation. Under the attendees for this particular receipt, Concur knows who has actually been at that meeting. So we've got Matthew Abbott's name and of course Thomas. The technology will usually just divide it up equally, but of course if you want to weight it in any particular direction, all these fields are totally editable, so you can amend the weighting accordingly. Going back into his claim, assuming that he's ready to go ahead and submit that for approval, he just hits that submit button at the bottom, and it will go through to the next stage in the approval workflow. The beauty of automating and having this information in the cloud is that it doesn't matter wherever this expense report is within the workflow, Thomas always has clear visibility into the stage that the expense claim is at. So here we can see it's just been submitted and it's pending approval from Annie, his manager. But he'll also get notifications and he's able to check in to see right up until when that claim's actually been paid. No more running around the business, phoning people up and trying to track down his expense claims. It's all here at his fingertips, which again is giving him time back to focus on the things that matter. Also possible to go back through historical claims as well. So that was a real whistle-stop tour, but hopefully I've done a good enough job of showing you guys how easy it is for business travellers to get from A to B and build their expense reports while they're on the go. In this scenario, Thomas has actually been able to submit his expense report for approval before even returning home from his trip. When he gets home, he doesn't need to worry about finding receipts and populating an online an Excel form. It's all done. So let's move on. Let's talk about Annie. Annie is going to get a notification to say a claim is ready for her approval. But before she does, this expense claim is actually going to be intercepted by a team of auditors at SAP Concur, who go through and validate all the information on the receipts that have been captured. So I mentioned we use optical character recognition software. We use the best of the best software, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that software is 100% accurate 100% of the time. Certainly saves employees having to put in 100% of the information, but there's always going to be room for error. This is machine learning. So as good as the technology is, sometimes the information that it captures can be awry. So it's important, in order to stay compliant with HMRC and other local tax regulatory bodies, there is going to be a need for somebody somewhere to double check the information that's been read by the technology matches precisely what is on the receipt. So the sorts of things Concur will do is double check the date, the amount, the expense type, and so on. It's a human check, and this is a service that we're able to provide for all businesses, regardless of your size. A lot of SMEs, in my experience, don't have the resource or the funding for shared service centres. So this is taking the burden off the finance team and guaranteeing that your business remains compliant, neither over or under claiming on VAT. As I'm sure you can agree, both are just as bad as each other. So in this particular scenario, we've got 46p worth of reclaimable VAT. Now, let's suppose that Thomas had actually bought something that wasn't VAT treatable. Perhaps he bought himself a croissant to go with that coffee. The technology would always calculate the amount of VAT based on the gross amount and wouldn't necessarily take into consideration the granular level of tax distinctions that we have here in the UK, distinguishing between hot and cold food. So this is probably the area where audit is most important, to make sure that the amount of VAT being reclaimed precisely matches what's on that receipt. So when Annie does eventually get her call to action in order to approve Thomas's claim, she can rest safe in the knowledge that all the information on his expense report has actually been checked. All she's doing is making sure that everything's within policy and looking for any exceptions that might have come up on the trip. So just like when you're booking your travel, SAP Concur has a traffic light system, if you like, in order for the technology to recognise what is and isn't acceptable to place through on your expense report. So we have soft stops, which are yellow warning flags and are designed to educate users on best practice behaviour. So we can reflect policy, we can reflect tolerances, and of course highlight this to budget holders and the finance team as and when things are being passed through an expense claim. So a great example would be perhaps a hotel stay. If your business says £200 per night in a hotel is the absolute maximum, you might want to build in a 10% tolerance on that. So if an employee ended up spending £219 on that hotel, it's going to flag up to the employee to remind them of the allowed amount, but it's not going to stop them from submitting their expense report in the long run, because it's within that 20% tolerance. We also have a hard stop, which until the error is corrected, that employee isn't going to be able to submit his expense report for approval. So in the example of the hotel that I just gave, if he'd spent £300 per night, there's absolutely no way that is going through on the workflow. And he'd need to make some corrections in order to reclaim the correct amount. So Annie has gone into her mobile application and she can see that she's got some approvals due. So we've got Thomas's trip up here, and you'll also notice that because the business also partners with Concur for invoices, she's also got some purchase requests that she'll need to take a look at some point as well. She's able to go through and review, and it all looks good to me. So she'd go ahead, she's hit approve, and it's going to end up in the next stage in the workflow with Freddie, who is our finance administrator. One other point to note as well is, depending on the hat that Annie is wearing, she's only ever going to need one login into Concur. So while she's able to approve people's expenses, she's also able to compile her own expense claim at the same time and book her own trips. She doesn't need multiple logons. Now, you'll probably notice up until now, I've actually been showing you a lot of stuff within the mobile phone application. And typically we find that your travellers and approvers, where they're on the go quite a lot, will interact with the mobile app more than they will the user interface on their laptop or desktop device. So in this third section, we're going to actually log into the user interface and see how the platform looks from there, just to give you a perspective from both. The key thing to remember though is SAP Concur is a cloud software platform. So you can do certain bits within your mobile app, and then when you're back in your office, you can also log in using your interface and finish off expense claims if you're that way inclined. So, Freddie, once a week, she will log into Concur as part of her Thursday morning task list, and she's going to go through and review all the claims that have been submitted and are waiting approval and final tick off from her ahead of going through into the payment batch. So we can see here up the top, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit small on your screens, but we're able to see that £343.71 claim that Thomas had submitted and that we've been working through. So Freddie's going to double click into that, and she's going to go through and review all of those receipts. Now, on Freddie's view, she's able to see ultimately 4 different sections. So down on the left-hand side, we've got all the various line items, the summary of how much they are, and all localised back into pounds sterling. Thomas is a UK-based employee, but let's suppose he was based in Spain. You would be able to, everybody would see him on a euro totalling amount here. So Freddie, again, she's going to know that this has all been audited and everything's absolutely correct, but ultimately she's looking for the exceptions and the anomalies, which typically Concur is going to highlight to her. Being a model employee, Thomas doesn't have any exceptions. He's well aware of what the company policy is, and he's remained well within those limits. In the middle section here, we can see a breakdown of everything on that receipt, from the amounts, the dates, the supplier, the department and cost centres that are we're coding to according to Thomas's profile, and of course a VAT breakdown. Possibly stating the obvious, but on the right hand side we've got a copy of the receipt image, so it makes tying back information from one to the other really easy. No need to for Freddie to have to go into different screens. It's all there for her. So assuming that she's happy, she's going to go ahead and she's going to submit that for approval. And ultimately, this claim is going to end up in what we call a batch and is ready for export into her finance system. More on that shortly. At any point within the workflow, if somebody isn't happy with whatever it is presented to them, there is an opportunity to send back to employees or actually circumnavigate the normal workflow and actually send it on to somebody else for a second glance. As I mentioned, once a claim has been approved, it's going to end up in a batch, and we're ready to get the information out of Concur and into a finance system. Now, one of the common misconceptions that I often hear from finance leaders is that a business has to be using SAP as their finance system. That's ultimately not true. We're vendor agnostic, so we can work with hundreds, if not thousands, of different finance systems out there. The most common ones that I've come across, however, of course, are SAP. They've got a full suite, but also Xero, Sage, NetSuite. There's a whole bunch out there that we work with. And that means that there's lots of different options depending on your business and how you'd like to transfer that information from one into the other. So during implementation, we would work with you in order to deliver the information how and when you would like specific to your finance system. Most commonly for SMEs, they will typically ask for an on-demand file. It's effectively a journal that you can download and upload from one system into the other. Other businesses, they want to opt for file transfer protocol, which is a little bit more streamlined. And other businesses, of course, they want to build their own connections through a third-party partner, or if they've got the expertise in-house, they will write that code. Concur is able to provide you with the APIs in order to do this. Finally, actually, it's a very common method as well, is to actually purchase a out-of-the-box connector. So we've got a variety that we have in-house, but we also work with integration partners who have already developed and are ready to plug and play their connectors with the two systems. So hopefully I've done a good enough job of helping you understand what it looks like from beginning to end as far as an expense claims life cycle is concerned. We've seen how Thomas has booked a meeting, booked a flight and submitted his expense claim all while he's on the go. And he's had a notification to approve that claim, and ultimately Freddie has given it the final sign-off in order to actually settle and reimburse Thomas. Now, hopefully this goes to show just how easy and quick it is to get information from A to B to C, and hopefully improve the turnaround times of an expense report. It's all very well making the lives of your travellers easier, but we believe in actually, as I said at the beginning of this webinar, we believe in actually providing businesses rich data insights in order to get the absolute maximum return on their investment. So one of the things that finance teams are often keen to see is the sorts of data that they can get out of Concur as a result. So I've just popped in a few different examples of the sorts of information that you'd be able to see, and ultimately, look into to decide where money could potentially be saved and where we're spending too much. And this is probably the bit about my job that I enjoy the most, is identifying trends, bringing it to the business, and making recommendations on how we can improve something that's already great, but make it even better. So fairly high level, a breakdown per employee, what they're spending their money on and how much they're spending over any given time. And all of these reports are pre-built within Concur, so it is possible to run these reports ad hoc or schedule them in order to burst out to particular distribution lists, depending on the data that you want to share. I won't go into too much detail today, but there are ways and means of tracking adoption of the Concur travel tool. So employees are their own people and they will book how they want to book. So as much as we possibly can, we would encourage them to use the Concur travel booking tool, and they should want to use that because it's going to make writing an expense report super easy. But you're always going to get one or two people, the minority, who are going to go ahead and they're going to book outside of that tool for whatever reason. There's a multitude of reasons, and the bottom line is we're not always going to be able to get 100% adoption. So being able to see who isn't adopting the tool and putting in other bits of cool technology, which I won't share with you on today's call, but there are other ways and means of capturing flights and hotels and car hire that have been booked outside of Concur Travel, but making sure that we've got the visibility of that spend still within inside the tool. So more than happy to provide more information on a application that we have called TripIt. It's free to download from the App Store, and we can provide more information on that as a follow-up if you see value in that. One thing that I always hear as positive feedback after companies have decided to automate is how much quicker it is for employees to be reimbursed. Cycle times, I think on average, they go down from 14 days to 3.5. So it just ultimately adds to greater satisfaction for employees and a happier finance team, because they're able to see what it is in their liabilities that are owed and budget for that accordingly. As I mentioned earlier, it is possible to integrate your corporate cards with SAP Concur. So actually, gone will be the days of having a paper statement that you need to tie back to totals at the end of a given month. Your statement ends up actually in Concur. This is quite an important report as far as your P-type end of year reporting goes. So being able to report on how much money is being spent, in particular on clients, but also as far as benefit in kind is concerned for your own employees. So using the technology as we did in today's webinar to capture your attendees and force employees to have to populate that information makes the finance team's lives at the end of the year so much easier, as they're able to run attendee analysis similar to the one that you can see on screen now. I've spoken a lot about VAT. It's probably one of my favourite subjects. This is a great indication of how much VAT has been reclaimed versus how much has actually been lost. We're all human. I'm certainly guilty of forgetting to ask for a tax receipt each and every time. Ultimately, telling the software that I've lost a receipt or I haven't asked for the correct receipt at point of sale, I'm certainly more mindful as a user these days to make sure that I'm getting that information up front, because I know that my business is actually reporting on my behaviours, and I'm costing the business money by not delivering the required information up front. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot of reporting as far as VAT is concerned. And I've also mentioned quite a lot about the other partners that we work with. Business Travel Direct is an elite partner. We love working with them as a travel management company. I've also mentioned that we work with integration specialists. There's a lot of ERP third-party vendors out there that we partner with. And we also partner with some foreign VAT reclaim specialists office as well. And there's been lots of success stories on how getting information under one roof and plugging and playing the right technology from other partners into the tool is able to maximise and help you reclaim on VAT that is quite commonly lost, international VAT reclaim. Exceptions. So as I mentioned, we have soft stops. So we have yellow warning flags, which tell employees when they've gone outside of policy. And we can actually force those users to provide commentary as to the reason why they've gone outside of that policy. So it's very simple to kind of run a report and see who are your worst offenders when it comes to submitting expense exceptions, and drive that behavioural change at the end of the day. It might be that some people haven't read the business T&E policy for 10 years, which and they read that on their first week at the business. It might be that policy is slightly outdated. So this gives you real insight in order to kind of amend your processes and take a step back to see what could be more flexible or improved as an organisation. As I mentioned, you should see organically cycle times coming down. So there are always going to be a few out there who are, again, your worst offenders. And chances are, this report probably won't come as any surprise. You probably already know who are slower to approve expense claims and who are the better ones. So again, this is just giving you that insight into how many days it's taken to approve, and identify why people like Ursula might be struggling to get claims approved on time. There could be a good reason for it. So that's the end of the reporting section, which I hope you found valuable. There are over 120 different reports as standard. So as long as, a rule of thumb is, as long as the data is actually being captured within the tool, you should be able to report on that there. And Vanessa's just going to take us through a little bit more information on security management ahead of us taking some questions from you all.
Lovely, thank you so much for that, Jess. Yeah, indeed, just to finish off, we've put some details here about security management, and there's obviously a lot that we could say about this. We could probably do a whole other presentation on this area, which we won't do. But suffice to say that obviously all data is held securely and within all the various legislative requirements. So if you do need any more details about that, then please do get in touch after this webinar. So I hope you've all enjoyed this session. I hope it's been useful to you, and this will bring us on to the Q&A. So I don't know if I'll just wait for a couple of minutes if there are any questions, if anyone would like to type anything to ask us any questions. Perhaps, one of the questions that people will sometimes ask, and perhaps I'll throw this over, is typically how long could an implementation typically take for something like adding in Concur expense?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So it's a great question, but it's also quite a loaded question, because ultimately it does depend on what your organisation actually needs. So I would say for the typical SME, you're probably looking at anywhere between 1 day, because we have 1 day workshops, which are completely free to attend, and you can arrive in the morning with no expense or invoice system, and you can leave in the afternoon with something that's ready to go and to roll out to your users. So that's something we're really excited about. And the reason we're able to do that is because the SMEs typically have a out-of-the-box standard platform, which is pre-configured and ultimately just needs some tweaks and changes. So yeah, for an SME, 1 day. You might not want to come in and see us, and that's fine, depending on where you're based. So the other way that we can do that is over 3 phone calls, but you're looking about 8 hours worth of resource. For some of our larger enterprises, again, it's a very difficult question to answer, but we're looking at anywhere, depending on the size and the scope of the project. I would play devil's advocate and I'd say allow 3 months. But it's business dependent. Every business has different wants and needs and different configurative requirements.
Okay. I understand that obviously requirements do vary depending very much on the client, the resources they're able to put to the project as well.
Yeah, I guess one thing I would add as well is, you know, we're super agile, so we can move as quickly as your organisation needs to, but at the same time we have to be pragmatic. There's other projects going on.
Of course.
Yeah.
No problem. Okay, lovely. We've got another question that's come in. Obviously, as part of the demo you showed us, when Thomas was travelling in his car, he put the mileage app on to record his mileage. Is there any way that mileage can also be entered manually?
Yeah, absolutely. So on my journey here actually today, I'll hold my hands up. I forgot to start my tracker. So when I actually arrived at the offices, yes, I can put in the A and B destinations, and using Google Maps technology, the technology will work out the smartest routes and calculate the mileages from A to B. Of course, if I didn't take that route, I can replot it, and again, it'll calculate to the nearest 0.1 mile. I guess the benefits of using the technology to plot your journey is gone are the days where people will round up to the nearest 5 or 10 miles. So ultimately, it's affording your business, greater accuracy when it comes to mileage reimbursement. Because, you know, back in the day, I think there was it was one area where employees would like to pad out their expense claims ever so slightly.
Okay, that's lovely. I've got one other question that's come in as well.
Great. Okay.
When the employee has taken a photo of the receipt, if at that point they can see that the OCR has not read the receipt correctly, are they able to amend it at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. I especially find that when I'm travelling and I'm overseas, sometimes it will. I might have been to a restaurant, but the technology is trying to code it as I don't know, something weird like a taxi.
Yes.
So I'm able to go in, I'm able to amend the expense type, the date, the amount, currency and so forth. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, lovely. Okay, no, that's really useful. Super. Paul, did you have any typical questions that people ask you?
I think I was just going to add to Jessica's answer with regards to mileage. We're seeing a large amount of customers that have a big sales force taken on the Drive product because of the sales force out there and claiming mileage through that system. It's a really good recognised product that, you know, enables more efficiency in the business.
Yes, fantastic.
Yeah, and actually, it's a good point, Paul. I think one thing that concerns people a lot is this sort of Big Brother, state that we're living in, or so it feels. The technology is based on the car actually moving. So don't worry, you can't spy on your employees, or if you're an employee, you can't be spied on. And also the technology's been designed so it doesn't actually drain the battery life as well.
Right, that's good, useful.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Well, I think that's all for the Q&As. So thank you very much, everyone that joined us today. I really hope you've got a greater understanding of the product and that you'd like to learn more about them. Anything that you'd like to know following this webinar, please get in touch with me at Business Travel Direct, and I'll certainly engage with our partners at SAP Concur. So thanks so much for your time, and Jess and Paul, thank you for your time as well.
Yeah, thank you all for having us.